He was a ghost in their system, a titan hidden in plain sight. You see a black man in a tailored Tom Ford, and you assume he's a guest in somebody else's world, right? But you don't know his name. Alexander Thorne was the architect of the very digital kingdom these people were strutting through like they owned the place. That morning at JFK, tucked into the velvet bubble of first-class privilege, they denied him his seat with a smile sharp enough to draw blood, a little act of bias, casual and dismissive, as if the man in the $1,000 suit was lost or lucky, not legendary. You know what I mean? They thought it was just another day at the office, another man nudged into his proper place. They didn't realize they just pulled the kill switch on their own entire world. He could have made a scene. He could have let the anger show, but when you've spent your life being underestimated, you learn to keep your hands steady and your words colder than January steel. Alexander simply accepted the downgrade first class to premium economy, window seat to a cramped middle spot in 24B between a guy who claimed both armrests and a tourist eating a sandwich out of the Ziploc. If you were watching, you might have thought he looked beaten, but you'd have been dead wrong. Because in that moment, as the gate agent Carol and the flight attendant Gary exchanged their little victorious smirks, Alexander reached for his phone, not to call customer service, not to threaten, not to plead. He dialed a single number. Kenji, initiate protocol Omega on the transatlantic account, he whispered. The silence on the other end told you everything. Kenji Tanaka, lead architect at Nexus Logistics, knew exactly what that meant. You sure? Execute. See, Protocol Omega was more than a threat. It was a god switch buried deep, never used, designed for only one scenario: catastrophic betrayal. Within minutes, 152 aircraft sat frozen on tarmacs across the world, their flight plans invalid, their crews unassigned, their cargo unmoved. A $2.1 billion empire brought to its knees, not by a virus, not by a hostile hacker, but by the silent withdrawal of trust from the man who had built their entire nervous system. The irony wasn't lost on Alexander, or on anyone who eventually learned the story. They paid him a fortune for a flawless system, and assumed they could treat him like anyone else, like less than anyone else, and nothing would happen. Inside the flight, Alexander sat stone still, letting the rhythm of the engines drown out the memory of the indignity, the 1,000th cut in a lifetime of cuts. But this time he didn't bleed recalculated. His mind wasn't replaying the argument at the gate. It was running scenarios, consequences, the balance sheet of justice. You know how it is sometimes you file a complaint, sometimes you write a letter, and sometimes, if you're holding the lever, you pull it. Meanwhile, chaos bloomed across the operations center in Dallas, the so-called bridge of transatlantic air, a hive of screens and blinking lights suddenly hijacked by red warnings. First, it was a crew assignment that wouldn't go through, then baggage manifests locked, then fuel requests rejected, and ticketing down in Miami. Maria Flores, senior dispatcher, and Chuck with his bag of pretzels thought it was just a glitch. Try manual override. No luck, system integrity hold. Calls started flying, to Nexus Logistics, to IT, to legal. No answers, just a calm voice. We are monitoring the situation. Deactivation requires sealed authorization. You ever hear panic in a voice that's trying not to show it? That's when you know it's real. Within 2 hours, every news ticker in the world was flashing red. Flights grounded, passengers stranded, losses ticking up by the millions. The boardroom in Dallas was a funeral. CEO Thomas Davies trying to grasp how a gate agent's snap judgment could topple an empire. A junior analyst finally pieced it together. JFK, Gate A17, passenger involuntarily downgraded Alexander Thorne. The silence was absolute. You could almost hear the collective, "Oh no, what have we done?" Security yanked Carol and Gary out of circulation, sat them in a tiny room, laid out the facts. You work for an airline powered by Nexus Logistics. Thorne's the CEO. You just told the man who holds your world together to sit in the back of the plane. The color drained from Gary's face. Carol went from defensive to terrified. It was the kind of twist that would be funny if it wasn't so damn tragic. Or maybe it was both, depending on which side of the table you're sitting on. By the time Flight 88 was coming in over London, transatlantic air was trending worldwide for all the wrong reasons. Bloggers on the tarmac tweeted Nashtim tear meltdown. Frustrated travelers filmed their misery. Financial journalists smelled blood in the water. The company's market value plummeted 40% before breakfast. Alexander watched it all unfold from his anonymous seat, cool as ever, knowing he was both the invisible hand and the storm. When the plane landed, instead of a customs queue, Alexander was greeted by a trembling battalion of executives. James Ballard, the UK station manager, sweating through his suit, offered apologies with all the sincerity of a man staring down his own extinction. "Our CEO wishes to speak with you personally." Alexander cut him off. "You think this is about a seat? About money? Your company made it very clear what my value is. Now I'm making it clear what my value ice in the meter is running." He walked past them into the terminal. No drama, just purpose, leaving behind a delegation paralyzed by their own fear. The real reckoning came the next day, a video call that felt more like a courtroom than a boardroom. Davies, Maxwell, Vance faces ashen. Voices hollow tried to beg, barter, apologize. Alexander didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "My terms are not negotiable," he said, laying out the cost of their arrogance. Fire Carroll and Gary for cause. Public apology naming the event and the word racial bias. A $50 million fund for anti-bias training. Davies' entire personal bonus for 2 years poured into that fund. And until every demand was met, transatlantic air stayed grounded. 1 hour to decide. That's all he gave them. No deal. System deletion permanent. Their airline would be lobotomized, erased from history. He was judge, jury, and, if necessary, executioner. They caved. Carroll and Gary, names now radioactive, were fired, publicly and forever. Davies made a live apology on camera, admitting to the world exactly what had happened, forfeiting his own millions, watching his reputation crumble. The system came back online, flights resumed, but the company's soul was gutted. For the market, it was relief. For the public, it was a spectacle. For those two small cogs, it was a life sentence. They became symbols, cautionary tales, unemployed and unforgiven. Davies, too, was forced out, stripped of his golden parachute, another titan who'd crashed on the rocks of his own neglect. New leadership came in with a single order: fix the culture, or this company won't last. Meanwhile, Alexander Thorne became something else entirely, not just a CEO, but a cultural force, proof that sometimes justice doesn't come from protest signs, but from the quiet, relentless hand that controls the system itself. And Nexus? Their stock soared. Every major corporation on Earth got the Momoto business with Thorne, and you're held to a higher standard. In the months after, the $50 million fund launched real reform. The Thorne Initiative set the bar for corporate training worldwide. Alexander never gave interviews, never made it about himself. He let his actions tell the story. Once, months later, sitting in a newly rebuilt first-class cabin, Alexander was thanked by a young flight attendant for what he'd done. "Not for the training," she said, "but for the lesson. It made a difference." Ismailed a real small smile. "Good. That's all I ever wanted." So yeah, this isn't just a revenge story. It's a story about the anatomy of power and what happens when the silent man in 24B finally gets tired of being polite. Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply show people the cost of their own prejudice, to flip the system they built into a mirror and make them see themselves. Karma isn't magic. It's just the bill coming due. If this story made you think, if you believe the quietest person in the room might just hold the keys to the whole building, share your thoughts below. Is this justice, overkill, or just the way real change happens now? Hit like, subscribe, and tell Mew Hat, would you have done his place? Let's talk about it.